Well, welcome to 10-Minute Record Reviews, episode 287. And this time I'm going to talk about Roy Haynes' record, well, his quartet's record from 1962, Out of the Afternoon. This is a 1972 Japanese repress. Doesn't quite have the laminated cover, as you can see, but it has some very old school looking staining in the spine and the interior. So Roy Haynes is still going strong at the age of 97, is one of the great survivors of post-war jazz. He was there at the foundations of bebop, cool jazz, hard bop, soul jazz, flirtations with the avant-garde, spiritual jazz, jazz rock, third stream. He's got something like 600, I don't know, it's hard to count, a lot of credits on records over the years, over 6 decades of recording. Of those, however, only about 20 to 25 are as a leader, and in a genre where the cliche is that everybody played with everybody, Roy Haynes really did play with everybody. And that's part of the appeal of this record, where 3 of the 4 players, including the leader, are basically veteran session guys who bring that easy feeling that comes with experience. The other major appeal of this record, of course, is the presence of the multi-instrumentalist Roland Kirk, who is in full multi-instrumental mode here, but in a way which is complementary rather than distracting. Roy Haynes was born in 1925 in the Roxbury area of Boston to parents who were immigrants from Barbados. He begins drum lessons around 9 years of age, he plays a lot in school, and he begins drumming professionally in his later teens. He develops a style of his own which ends up being quite influential as bebop develops, less about just pounding out the beat, hitting the 2s and 4s, more about some of the subtleties around cymbal work, around rim shots, and his playing has this kind of effervescent energy all the way through his career, which ends up giving him the nickname Snap Crackle. Now, of course, he's not alone in innovating bebop drumming. There's people like Max Roach and Kenny Clark and Joe Jones who obviously are making major contributions. But he's the guy that gets the nickname, and he is commonly seen as one of the very important links between swing-era drumming and the much more nuanced approach of people like Elvin Jones in the 1960s. His first substantial professional gig after finishing school was with Savvy Lewis, who had an orchestra with a fair following in Boston. Following his time with Lewis, in the summer of 1945, he's got a summer-long gig playing for a band leader called Phil Edmond out on Martha's Vineyard. He gets a special delivery letter one day. It's from a band leader in New York called Louis Russell. Now, Louis Russell goes back to the swing era, and his band was at various points the backup band to Louis Armstrong. So this is kind of the big time. And Russell, sight unseen, is writing to him asking him to come and join his band. The connection was that Russell had a guy playing sax in his band, a guy called Charlie Holmes, who was a Bostonian, who had seen Haynes play, thought he was great, recommended him. Anyway, the letter comes with a one-way ticket included. Haynes sees this is his ticket, metaphorically as well as literally, and moves to New York, where he still lives to this day. He then takes arguably another step up in 1947 when he joins Lester Young's band. Now, Lester Young was, of course, arguably the most influential tenor saxophonist of the mid-century period. He's the tenor on whom all the great subsequent tenors base their sound. He's the origin, frankly, of the cool jazz sound. Haynes plays with Prez for about 2 years, and this gig also means regularly backing up Billie Holiday. When he leaves Young, he then bounces around a little bit. He spends some time with Kai Winding, the trombonist. He also goes on one of Norman Grantz's Jazz at the Philharmonic tours in 1949. Following that, he really lands squarely in the center of the jazz universe when he joins Charlie Parker's quintet between 1949 and 1952. On top of gigging regularly with all these great players, Haynes also got tons of side work as well. And this is because in a jazz world full of broken souls, of tortured artists, of people with serious demons that they were battling, Haynes is an absolute beacon of stability and resilience. He wasn't a user. He had a stable home life. He made his gigs on time. When he showed up, he played extraordinarily well. He was incredibly reliable. He was also renowned for having a great ear and sensitivity and respect for his fellow performers, and was able to adapt to individual soloists with great ease. So as a consequence, he shows up all over the place. He's on the original Parker and Gillespie recording of Night in Tunisia. Years later, he's a regular guest with the classic Coltrane Quartet, so much so, in fact, that he appears on a couple of their records as well. The critics might have ignored him, but producers didn't. And between 1950 and 1965, he plays with a literal who's who of the jazz world. Prez, Dizzy, Hampton, Getz, Miles, Monk, Vaughan, Coltrane, Tyner, Dolphy. And as the front lines rotated and the jazz scene changed, there he was still in the late 60s playing with Pharoah Sanders, playing with Alice Coltrane, in the 70s playing with Chick Corea, in the 80s playing with Pat Metheny. By 1953, Haynes feels ready to leave Parker because at that point Bird is kind of spiraling downhill anyway. He actually turned down Duke Ellington's offer to join him around the same time, and he then makes a decision to join the trio of musicians supporting Sarah Vaughan between 1953 and 1958. You can hear him on two of her very best records, Images, and then of course in 1955 her great self-titled record as well, both of which are on Emersy. His recording debut as a leader happens around this time too, in 1954, again for Emersy Records. This was a 10-inch called Bustman's Holiday. It's actually basically an EP, and it's recorded in Sweden actually while he's on tour with Lionel Hampton, and it's well worth listening to. There is, in addition to Haynes' drum work, some great work on tenor by a guy called Sahib Shahab. One of the other highlights from his career as a leader in the 1950s is the record We Three from 1959, which he did with Paul Chambers and Phineas Newborn, which has this, what I also think is this hilarious cover where Chambers looks like he's dropping off Haynes and Newborn at school. And as the 50s wore on, he kept breaking the mold with his style, and in particular, he starts to add fills not just at the end of a particular progression, like say at the end of a 12-bar progression in the blues, but just wherever he felt like it. And this is a tendency which, again, you start to see expressed more and more, say, in Elvin Jones playing too around the same time. And this means Haynes remains attractive to the younger, hipper players in the scene. Here was a guy who was part of the bebop revolution, who broke all the rules then, and he's still breaking the rules. He is playing with some of the most exciting and challenging young players around. For instance, he's on 8 different recordings with Eric Dolphy in 1961. And so perhaps it's no surprise that when Impulse gets him to make his only record as a leader for that label, he's joined by another young, exciting player, Roland Kirk, in 1962. This record is made in 2 different sessions in May 1962, on the 16th and then again a week later on the 23rd, out at Rudy Van Gelder's studio in Englewood Cliffs. Bob Thiel is the producer. Roy Haynes is on drums, Tommy Flanagan is on the piano, Henry Grimes is playing bass, and Roland Kirk, of course, is bringing his full arsenal: the tenor sax, the manzello, the stritch, the flute, the nose flute. The record is billed as the Roy Haynes Quartet, and maybe they did a few club dates to prepare, but in no way was this foursome a regular thing. Haynes and Grimes had both been on a Sonny Rollins record in 1958. Haynes had also guested on Tommy Flanagan's second solo record in 1960, but it's unclear whether Haynes and Kirk had much to do with each other before this recording date. In fact, it's kind of rare for Kirk to be a sideman at all. I think he only appears as a sideman on 7 other people's records, and about half of those are all in a bunch for Quincy Jones in his big band. So I think it's probable that this foursome comes together because Thiel was working the phones trying to get the talent for the date. Haynes eventually repays the favor to Kirk later in the year when he appears on Kirk's excellent record Domino. Side 1 starts with Moonray, which is an Artie Shaw tune, and here we have right off the bat Kirk doing what Kirk does best, playing his manzello and his tenor simultaneously. It's almost eerie, but it's a very cool effect, and again, it's not overdone in this record. Sometimes Kirk is a bit much, but that's not the case here. The second track in the record is the well-known standard Fly Me to the Moon, the second lunar-themed tune in a row. On this one, Kirk doubles up here and there, but for the most part, he's giving a straight-up tenor in the first part and then manzello later on. The last track on side 1 is the first Haynes composition. It's a real winner. It's one of the standout tracks in the record. It's called Raoul. This has some incredible cymbal work by Haynes and an absolutely on-fire solo, and also some very nice arco bass work from Henry Grimes. Side 2 begins with another Haynes composition named for his nickname, Snap Crackle. This begins with Flanagan saying, "Roy Haynes," like a club announcer. Then Kirk plays some flute, augmented with nose flute and a bit of humming. That then leads into a terrific bass drum spotlight, which has Haynes bringing that snappy sound in the title. If I Should Lose You has Kirk playing a stritch solo, building up to some incredible intensity, like sheets of sound kind of stuff. Haynes is playing, solos and fills are incredible all the way through this track. Long Wharf is kind of a sprint with very rapid work from everybody. The final track, Some Other Spring, is the only true ballad on the record with some very lyrical work from Kirk on the manzello. As I've suggested earlier in this video, I don't always care for Kirk's instrumental choices, but here he's tasteful and selective. You don't find yourself going, "What's going on here?" and checking the liner notes. And as for the leader, he's never sounded better. His solos are great, and his comping all the way through is fascinating. This is a true drum nerd record. It's a great set of hard bop numbers, energetic and varied, and although it may not be as adventurous as some other music released around the same time, it's always a treat to spin. For me, it's 4.5 out of 5 stars.